and people's lives depended on me attending my work. As long as I had the proper PPE, then I would be there, I would be doing my job, I would put my life on the line, because it could mean that umpteen other people's lives could be, changed or saved because of that. But I'm not going to put my life on the line for a Greggs.
No way. That's absolutely abysmal. That is just, I have no words for that. It's John, it's my heart. Oh, it's...
And that's literally what the, and it's changed. This was in August that I think the Prime Minister gave the announcement that he wanted 80% civil servants back at in their workplaces. Of course, then the second big lockdown took place, so that was off for almost all the civil servants except for DVLA, where they did actually force them back to work. So we've now got them in a position where they're taking industrial action. But it looks like, in addition to that, now the sounds are coming from central government that because of the vaccination process that they're going to start to try and force all civil servants back to work. And so that will bring, because we just heard that for the DWP, who were in meetings yesterday on that. So it looks like DVLA will be taking action, but then it could be far more widespread than that. At today's NEC, I flagged up that this could get very brutal very quickly. And when I talk brutal, I'm talking about things in my memory like minor strike kind of worry attrition very quickly, with the media and the state being used in order to take effective action against people in industrial action. So, and the full weight of the media, of course, will be on the side of the government, as we've seen very recently with almost everything. I mean, I've never ever witnessed a situation whereby 125,000 people can die, a lot of them needlessly, at the hands of the government, who have definitely got blood on their hands, and there isn't an outcry about it.
We're about to go live, by the way.
I'm there.
Hello, and welcome to this public forum organised by the Scottish Socialist Voice. My name's Richie Venton. I'm the Scottish Socialist Party National Workplace Organiser, and the editor of The Voice, Ken Ferguson, has asked me to both chair this and be one of the speakers. I think he's actually learning from the capitalist employing class, getting 2 jobs done for the price of 1. So I'll do my best. Welcome to everybody to this event, this public forum, this public rally, organised by the Scottish Socialist Voice, which is a paper produced by the Scottish Socialist Party, but actually reaches far further and broader than that. It seeks to give a voice to any set of workers that are in struggle. And I want to welcome everybody who's watching this either on live stream or through the Zoom event itself, including many groups of workers engaged in battles which I know for fact are present. Workers on strike with Scottish Gas, health service workers, those at FE colleges, on the railways preparing for action from Sunday onwards, BT workers balloting for action, offshore workers, those in retail facing horrendous abuse for feeding the nation, people in hospitality with no job security, local authority workers facing cuts, young people learning about the realities of working life, even while they're still at school attending this. And of course, also the likes of unpaid carers who saves the state a fortune every year. It truly is a working class forum, a forum of working people. And what a week we've just been living through to hold this event. First of all, it was called to coincide with the anniversary of the first lockdown and the year of mass suffering that has followed. It's the week when bully boys at British Gas have issued the deadline of today, in fact, lunchtime today, for workers to sign up to far worse contracts or face mass sackings from the 1st of April. It's the week in which fire and rehire has become the new virus, not just in Scottish Gas, but also places like Tesco's Livingston, Northwest Buses in Manchester, Camel Air Shipyards, BT workers and so on. And also Colleges Scotland, where the bosses there have reneged on a deal that they actually agreed to propose and then decided not to support, provoking strikes by staff against substandard education being issued on the cheap. Now, I think this week's also demonstrated that workers fighting back can win concessions, substantial concessions, even when they're not enough. BT workers balloting for future action have just been offered, in effect, a bribe of £1,000 bonus to try and undermine the vote for action. Health service workers have just been offered 4% in Scotland after 11 years of the same Scottish government presiding over a 20% pay cut on average for health workers. This week also marks a victory for all of us. The Shrewsbury pickets, building workers on strike in 1972, who were not just arrested and tried and framed, stitched up, but jailed and then in turn tortured, damaging the life of Des Warren in particular. Then after 48 years, the best part of a half a century, their names have been cleared after a tenacious campaign on their behalf, led by the best known of them, Ricky Tomlinson. Well, if clearing their name after half a century is regarded by some people as justice, then I would suggest the words of Ricky's well-known character, Jim Royal, British justice my arse. It's an indication of the cruel class types of rule that we suffer under this system. And we're reminded also topically by the fact that that's the same week when they were exonerated after being jailed, etc., by the fact that the Tory government are putting through a bill, a police bill, which seeks to block the right to a protest after having knocked lumps out of women on a peaceful vigil at Clapham. And also, Police Scotland were called in order to prevent the right to picket by strikers in a cardboard factory, I think it is, Seca. Now, those are reminders of the cruel class domination in the capitalist system, which we need to unite against and challenge. And also, meantime, climate chaos continues as governments pay lip service to a just transition, but fail to answer key questions like, where are the jobs in that transition? And where's the action to transfer worker skills to a clean, green future that enhances the living standards of the working class, including those currently employed in fossil fuel industries? So we're delighted tonight to be joined on the platform by speakers directly on the front line of fighting back, of struggle against these various forms of attack. This forum is timed to mark a year of COVID, a year of the man-made plague which has swept the planet, scything its way through lives and livelihoods of millions. But let's step back for a minute from the immediate here-now struggles to put them in context. COVID-19 is not a plague visited upon humanity by some kind of wrathful God. It's created and spread, in essence, by the same political economic system that is trashing the planet, threatening its survival, namely globalized capitalism, because that has involved, global capitalism has involved the invasion of wild corners of the earth, triggering zoonotic spillovers of pathogens, of viruses and so on, usually carried by the likes of bats and other wild animals, things were previously beyond the reach of humanity. Because globalized capitalism has invaded the wildernesses for profit, with profit for the likes of logging companies through deforestation, factory farming, big agribusiness, and also, of course, the likes of cash crops, monocrops, imposed upon poorer countries by multinationals and richer imperial powers. And that development is reinforced by climate change that has driven numbers of species out of their usual wild habitats closer to contact with human beings. And all combined with global production for profit, the global division of labour, and global rapid travel has spread the coronavirus with unprecedented haste and unprecedented frequency, because this is just the latest in a number of such pandemics. On top of which, the brutal political choices made by our own governments and our own ruling classes led to planned poverty and the planned decimation of public services, including the likes of the health service and social care. The financial banking wing of capitalism made a fortune in recent decades at the expense of wrecking productive capacity, meaning that the likes of Scotland and Britain were incapable of responding adequately to the outbreak of this virus. And the result is the avoidable slaughter of innocents. In 2006, a group of 134 eminent scientists produced a report warning the British government of the need to prepare for a pandemic very like COVID-19 in the way they described it. In 2017, exercises were carried out that warned the same British government that the health service would be overrun by a respiratory pandemic very like COVID-19 because of the state of the NHS in terms of underfunding and understaffing. In the same year, the Tories celebrated in Parliament when they defeated a proposal to increase the pay of health workers, firefighters, and others. And on the 23rd of January last year, the eminent medical magazine Lancet published a comprehensive report on the nature of COVID-19 from Chinese scientists. But the British government chose to ignore it because, and this is not a rhetorical flourish, it's literally the case, they were far too preoccupied and busy with organising legislation to ban the right to all-out strike action at the time when they should have been taking action against the spread of the coronavirus. And despite repeated warnings by scientists, the governments of Britain and Scotland were far too slow to act. And previous decades of decimation meant the lack of adequate staffing levels and adequate equipment in order to cope in the health service. For a short time, a week or so, there was a feeble attempt to carry out tests, and that was abandoned when, for example, NHS England declared that it had to stop because the labs could not cope with the exercise. They didn't have the equipment and the capacity. What a condemnation of the system. And of course, they then retreated to what I've called on many occasions the social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest at its most grotesque, in the form of the theory of herd immunity. Let the pandemic rip through the population in order to spread it, and that'll mean the population becomes immune. And of course, that wasn't just defended by Boris Johnson, but by the Scottish government for a period, not just by Boris Johnson's scientific ciphers, but also by Professor Jason Leach, who defended that position for a short spell. And by the way, the mask slipped with a columnist, the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph, when he spelled out the thinking of some people. where he said, to quote, "COVID-19 primarily kills the elderly. Not to put too fine a point on it, from an entirely disinterested economic perspective, the COVID-19 might even prove mildly beneficial in the long term by disproportionately culling elderly dependents." That's capitalism summed up, the philosophy that lies behind it. Now, it's widely accepted that after the backlash against the idea of herd immunity forced them into a delayed, belated lockdown almost exactly a year ago on the 23rd of March, it's widely accepted by scientists that even 1 week earlier would have saved 20,000 people's lives in Britain. But the government of Johnson and his hired scientists thought and declared that 20,000 deaths in total in Britain would be a good result, to use their phrase, scaring the living daylights of people at the time. And what's the result of all that? 127,000 deaths, the majority of them avoidable. These forces truly have blood on their hands. And what are some of the key features of the past 12 months, experienced and lived through by millions of people in a fashion that has not been lived through by anything since, such as the Second World War? First of all, your position in the class-divided society we live in determines your chances and prospects of life and death. COVID-19 is not the great leveler, not the great equalizer. Numerous studies that I won't spend time spelling out have proven that people in low pay, low income, are 2, 3, and 4 times more likely to die if they catch it than people on the average income. And several factors feed into this, factors that we need to tackle in fighting to shape the future to an entirely different, humane, acceptable normal for the future. Low-paid, insecure work, deliberately and systematically created, particularly in the decades since the dark ages of Maggie Thatcher, has led to many of those deaths. Those on pitiful pay, and often also with very little trade union organisation to defend their conditions, are far more likely to be financially blackmailed and bullied into going to work even when they're sick, endangering themselves and others. Employers cut corners to save profits, refusing to implement adequate PPE, safety measures, or closures of workplace in order to protect their lives. And sick pay in this country is a sick joke, with statutory sick pay of £95.85. That is something that many of us fought consistently, where, for example, I, since last February of 2020, fought ferociously as a trade union convener for full average wages for any worker who was off sick or forced to self-isolate. But some employers chose, rather than to implement that, they chose to sack or victimise people who stood up for those kind of demands, rather than afford workers a position where they could afford to be off sick and protect themselves. Poverty pay kills people. That's the conclusion we have to draw. And there was another survey recently, a comprehensive one in the British Medical Journal, that proved that point with a simple point. Everybody was found to be equally willing to self-isolate, but people on incomes of less than 20,000 were 3 times less likely to carry out that self-isolation, simply because they couldn't afford it. Poverty kills people. And the totally inadequate staffing levels and equally inadequate PPE in our hospitals led to quite a number of deaths, because the government, for example, in Scotland panicked that it was going to be overrun by COVID patients. And therefore, the same SNP government, which presided over the loss of 6,000 hospital beds in the previous 11 years, then forced elderly patients to be dumped into care homes, untested, or in some cases tested positive. And they were put into these homes run for private profit with totally inadequate measures, with staff who were terrified of testing positive because they didn't enjoy any kind of sick benefit scheme and quite often were on insecure contracts and couldn't afford to be off sick, thereby further spreading the virus amongst the elderly, causing the horrible cold carnage in the care homes amongst older people. And if it wasn't for the organised trade union movement, there would have been no such thing as risk assessments in workplaces. There would have been no such thing as furlough, although we in the Scottish Socialist Party have consistently argued that furlough should be on 100% wages, not 80%. And the past year has underlined the case put by the Voice and the SSP for workers' control of workplace health and safety through elected committees of health and safety reps and shop stewards, rather than leaving it in the hands of senior managers whose motivation is to cut corners and maximise profit. Another primary conclusion from the past year's experiences is that we're not all in this together. The rich have gorged themselves on publicly funded handouts, and also in some sectors, like the supermarkets, big tech, big pharma, big energy companies, on soaring profits as a result of the conditions of lockdowns and so on. And COVID, like wars, is good for something. It's good for a tiny minority. It makes the rich richer. For example, Jeff Bezos of Amazon increased his income, increased it last year by the equivalent of the combined entire budgets of the National Health Services of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. That's the grotesque concentration of wealth, or the fact that 10 richest people on earth, according to Oxfam, have enough wealth in their hands to wipe out world poverty and to vaccinate the entire population of the planet. That's capitalism globally. We still live in a society defined above all by class. And for all the soothing symphonies about a new normal, the dire warnings made in the pages of the Scottish Socialist Voice over the past year have proven to be right. The employers and their hired governments are out to punish working class people for the costs of COVID. That's why we see the spread of this new virus, fire and rehire, a blunt instrument wielded to drive workers down into accepting lower conditions, lower wages, and a lower share of the wealth that the working class create in the first place. That's why companies are threatening permanent job losses when the publicly funded life support system of furlough is switched off. That's why those people hailed as heroes by Tory government and others, including the 920,000 people in Scotland alone who are classified as key workers, were hailed as heroes when they were expected and pushed into going to work to risk their lives to keep society functioning, are then treated as zeros when it comes to their pay, with pay losses being rampant even already before they really get stuck in as they're doing right now. Those are a few of the reasons we need to build a united resistance based especially on the potential power of the organised working class. And in doing so, we also urgently need to popularise a vision of an entirely different future. We would say a socialist future, one where the talent of young people leaving school or college is harnessed for the good of society and the planet, with guaranteed, well-paid, secure jobs, trade unionised jobs, meaningful jobs, or education and training. Something that could easily be created by the development of what we've called a socialist recovery plan or a socialist Green New Deal, based fundamentally on public ownership, based on the need to build decent, environmentally friendly housing and to retrofit existing stock, based on the need to provide clean energy at a cost that people can afford, based on the need for free public transport to combat poverty and pollution. all this are the types of things I think we need to start discussing, popularising and fighting for as a united movement. And this public event, this forum, aims to contribute to popularising that vision and to assist through our solidarity the struggles required to achieve it, starting with the immediate defensive struggles that many of the people in this room are already involved in. And therefore, I'm pleased to introduce the first of our panel of speakers who will convey, as others will, some of the immediate battles that they're involved in and the need for us to help them win so that we get a glimpse of not just what we need to win now, but also a glimpse of what's required to build a new, entirely different future that puts working class people and the planet we live on before the profit of the 1% or the 10 richest or the multinationals, whichever way you want to express it. So our first speaker is John, who's a striker with Scottish Gas. He's a Scottish Gas engineer. John's withholding his full name because he knows full well that otherwise he faces the possibility of being victimised by the employers who are already using bully boy tactics. He will bring across to, I'm sure, the real life impact of the savage cuts to terms and conditions and the vicious weapon being used, the weapon of choice of many employers, fire and rehire, where today was the deadline for John and his colleagues to sign up to a worse contract or face the prospect of the sack from the 1st of April being notified. So I'm pleased to introduce, and I hope you'll all give a virtual, big warm welcome to John, Scottish Gas engineer, currently on strike. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Richie. And first off, I'd just like to apologise for the lack of camera, but as Richie says, there's already a few engineers that are facing disciplinary actions for expressing their views on social media. So I thought it would be easier to keep mine off for today. But I'll just sort of set the scene for people that don't know. This time last year in March, there was a new CEO appointed in Centrica, which is the parent company of British Gas. And within 3 months of him being in the job, he had issued the fire and rehire notice without any sort of consultation or conversation about possible changes. So he had put his stall out pretty quickly. There's over 40 changes in the contract that we didn't get to negotiate or discuss. I won't go through all of them, obviously, but the sort of point of it is you'll be in working for an extra 156 hours per year for the same salary, and you'll be working more weekends for the same salary. You'll be working later shifts for the same salary. So it's all sort of geared towards us being out of the house longer, away from our families, away from our kids, and in work. You get less time to complete jobs, so you have to work faster. And the amount of jobs that you're currently completing just now needs to be increased, so you're working faster, doing more jobs, doing longer hours for the same wage. There's cuts to the overtime and our rota. Our rota we would normally get 6 months in advance, which is pretty reasonable. It means we can plan our holidays, plan our weekends, and plan your family time. But now it's going to be 6 weeks in advance, which isn't a lot of time to sort of plan your life if you've got a life outside going to your work. But in December, the first deadline was Christmas Eve, which was really nice to them. If you signed on Christmas Eve, you would get a £2,000 bribe to sort of sweeten the deal. And those of you that didn't sign on Christmas Eve wouldn't get that bribe. But thankfully, most of our colleagues sort of refused to sign. There was over 4,000 engineers and office staff that voted against signing the contracts, and and here we are, the day it's this is their new deadline. At 12 o'clock today, they had extended the bribe because so little had signed at Christmas. They've extended it to today at 12 o'clock. And I'm proud to say that I never signed the contract, but obviously it's quite concerning because as it stands this time next week, I will be unemployed along with quite a few other people. So it is quite a concerning time. It's very real now. It's 6-7 months ago. It was something that we thought we could fight and we had a lot of support with, but ultimately there's only so much sort of retweeting and sort of sending letters in that can help. You need action for government. We've had every sort of party agreeing that it's despicable and it's disgusting, but nobody's done anything to stop it from happening. So it's very real now, and it's happening to other companies as well, smaller companies. So if it's successful for the business at a company like Scottish Gas, it will be successful for a whole range of companies. It really is the sort of first big sort of the acid test of it. So we will find out next week if there's been a massive U-turn at the British Gas Board, but I don't think there will be, unfortunately. And I think by this time next week there'll be quite a few of us looking for new jobs, and then there'll be other businesses looking at how it worked for British Gas and bringing it to a lot more people around the country.
Okay, John, is that you finished, mate?
Pretty much,
No, I wasn't sure. I don't know whether they made it cut out for you.
No, that's pretty much us. It is a real attack on workers, and it is it's a concerning time for everybody. I think there's a lot of people that it's not their fight. They're not directly involved, so they might quietly think it's a disgrace, but nobody's going to do much about it until it comes to your door. And I think it's important that we're all sort of in this together.
Thanks very much, John. And I mean, it's really humbling when you hear an account like that firsthand of the impact that these vicious methods by the employers, which of course is backed up by government legislation, because they use clauses of employment legislation to issue these Section 188 notices to fire and rehire people. And also I have to say that the likes of the British TUC maybe should have got off their backsides a bit early on in the likes of this dispute in order to combine with the gas workers, because if a defeat is scored against Scottish Gas and British Gas engineers, then it's a defeat for everybody, and likewise a victory would be. So full power to you for having the courage and the determination and the principles to stand by where you have, John. And we hope it doesn't come to the fact that you're out of a job, but we realise it's quite possible. One of the things I'd mention at this point before I introduce the next speaker is that one of the things we've done with the Scottish Socialist Voice is done our modest best to advertise and publicise this dispute, amongst other things by interviewing a number of Scottish Gas engineers, quite often again withholding their actual names, and also the very courageous women workers in the office who've come out on strike, some of whom are here tonight, who came out on strike even though they'll have these new conditions imposed on them next week anyway, and they're losing bonuses for their solidarity action. But again, full marks, and that's the spirit of working class solidarity we need to build upon. So I'd advise and appeal to people to get a subscription to the Scottish Socialist Voice. There'll be a link put up at some point during the meeting where you can subscribe and get 12 editions for £10, and it's very well worthwhile both in the analysis we've provided on COVID and the immediate struggles such as John's and that of the women workers as well. So the next speaker is somebody who, I'm sticking to the Johns for a minute, the two Johns. I think that's a comedy sketch, isn't it? The next speaker is one of the leaders, the national salaries convener, to be exact, of the FE College workers who are out on strike today. So it's hot from the picket line. We'll be hearing from John Kelly. Well, kind of hot from the picket line. John's actually not too well, so bear with him. It's to his credit that he's been on a picket line at 8 o'clock this morning. He's had his vaccination and doesn't feel too well, so he's not one of those adverts for the vaccine. He's not all happy clappy as a result of it. He feels a bit under the weather for one day. And he's been at various union rallies and so on. But John is somebody who I've got personal gratitude towards, because when I was sacked for standing up doing what a decent union convener should do, John was one of those people who combined into the reinstatement campaign, which was established in my own situation. And therefore, I'd return the solidarity to John. He's representing education workers in the further education colleges, which of course are wall-to-wall overwhelmingly populated by working class students, and you'd think should be at the heart of any economic recovery, education, investment in it, but they're trying to get it on the cheap instead. John will describe what that means in practice. So John Kelly, National Salaries Convener for the EIS-FELA, the union in the FE colleges. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Richie. First of all, I'd like to send solidarity to John, the gas worker there. Absolutely appalling. Despicable what's going on in our country today. And what's going on there is similar to what's going on in FE, with a clear, hardline neoliberal agenda that we are having to face. And although we have a government in our country that pretends or purports to be progressive in some sort of way, let's be clear that at the heart of that government is a hardline neoliberal agenda against us all. And Richie's right, I'm not feeling at my best. I got my vax yesterday and I've been feeling pretty rotten all day, although I have been truly inspired by what members in my union have done today. We've been in dispute since last August, and every college in Scotland had people out on strike today. My own college had nobody in it at all. I work in Paisley at West College, Scotland. We were down in the picket line there. 3 of us socially distanced. We didn't really need that because most of our picketing was done online flying pickets. That's what we organised. And all over the country, that's what we had. And it's, as much as COVID has been bloody awful, I think for union organisation, there's quite a lot of lessons for us to learn about the use of platforms like this, about the use of online meetings, about connecting across the country with other members. I mean, I can see some colleagues from some of the other colleges here tonight who I've only met recently. There's Kyla, well done. We're able to connect between a college in Paisley and a college in Argyll and get to know each other well and support each other, which is a fabulous thing. I'd like to give a wee bit of background to our dispute, which I think would be worthwhile. We negotiate nationally with an employers association, and that employers association is called Colleges Scotland, right? They represent all colleges in Scotland, and we represent all lecturers in further education colleges. They're a hardline outfit who detest trade unions. They really do. It sticks in their craw that you turn up at a meeting to meet them. They really expect us to doff our forelock to them, bow over and just accept anything. And unfortunately for them, they've confronted a pretty active union in EIS-FELA. We've been in strike every year apart from last year for the last 6 years. And in every single dispute that we've been in, we've won. In every single dispute, we've won by taking strike action. In every single dispute, the difference has been striking. That's one of our mottos. And it is quite clear that the difference is striking between people who organise themselves and people who don't organise themselves. And I'm not being critical of people who don't organise themselves, because we know how difficult it is. We're fortunate, and Richie alluded to that, that not only is much of the population of our students group working class, but many of our activists and staff who work in our union are working class people with a working class background and a recognition that trade unions are a force for good. So they're an outfit, College of Scotland, which sees us only as a cost and not as an asset. They're a body that sends a negotiating team along to see us, the vast majority of whom have never taught, the vast majority of whom who know very little about education, the vast majority of whom are highly paid executives, most of them HR execs and accountants who turn up to speak to us. And they just see us as a total pain in the arse, pardon the French. They really do. They're only interested in counting beans rather than considering services for students. And the vast majority of them have never ever actually used the services of a college, because most of them went through a university system. So their knowledge of what actually happens in the workplaces that they're attempting to frame and they're attempting to shape and they're attempting to organise is pretty limited. Our dispute focuses on the role of lecturers in college. In other words, what a lecturer is, right? Which we think is a pretty obvious thing. A lecturer is somebody that lectures, or a lecturer is somebody that prepares classes. A lecturer is somebody who teaches classes. A lecturer is somebody who marks work from students. See all those points that I've just said? At the last negotiating meeting with management, I asked them to confirm that that was true, and they refused to comment. For 5 hours, we repeated over and over again, what is the role of a lecturer? And they continually deny that many posts that they are now operating across the sector are lecturing posts. Now, the reason for that is our successes over the last 5 or 6 years have seen the establishment of high national pay scales, the establishment of good terms and conditions, the establishment of good transfer to permanency for people in temporary work and all of that. But because of that, what they're seeking to do is undermine those and think these national agreements are no good to us. We want them to be cheaper. We want them to be doing more for less. And I was struck with what John said. He used those words. They're looking for more for less. They're expecting more out of people. That's exactly what they want to do in colleges at the moment. They want to come up with a scheme where in some colleges, they'll simply start to employ other people. And at least one college over the last year, they have been operating fire and rehire. At Forth Valley College, they have fired and rehired about 30 odd people. And those people are now on particularly difficult contracts. In fact, I know a number of comrades in in that college, and at least 4 of them are off with serious mental health issues because it's impossible to do the job that's been demanded of them. So this dispute's all about more for less. This dispute has to be confronted. But the funny wee bit at the end of this is that in recent negotiations with them, we eventually listened to some of the things that they had to say, and we listened to their proposals, and we thought we could use their proposals to our gain, and we accepted their proposals. This caused them no end of confusion. We then took their proposals back to our executive and ratified them. They then turned up at our next meeting and said, we're not going to ratify our proposals. And just stop and think about that. They put proposals to us, which are headed up employers' proposals. They then turn up at a meeting and say, we're not accepting our own proposals. That's where we ended up on Tuesday with these rascals. And there is only one way out of this. The action that our members took today, solid strike action, and seeking to pressurise the government. We've used the Scottish Greens and the Labour Party yesterday in Parliament to put pressure on what we commonly call the invisible man, Richard Lockhead, who is the Minister for Further and Higher Education, who is invisible, who is utterly useless, and has never made a comment worthy of anything to do with education in his life. And yet, he's the person who's in charge of not only further education, but also higher education in this country. So we need to put pressure on them, and we have been doing that. We feel that the employers are a bit rattled. They were bombarded with social media today, and they shut down their Twitter account for most of the day, and then sent out a press release at the end of the day, which in the first line had a howler of a spelling mistake in it, which just typifies the whole thing. We're talking about education, and they can't spell the bloody word breach. You know, they weren't referring to a rifle. They were referring to apparently something that I had done at the last meeting that I met them. They are incompetent fools. We're confident we will beat them. We'll beat them repeatedly over and over and over again. And that's what workers have to do. We know it's incredibly, incredibly difficult, and it seems quite easy for me to sit and say this. Probably it is a bit easier for me because I'm getting a bit kind of old and weary towards the end of my career. And if it was the case that they try and bullet me, I'd be quite happy for them to bring it on and go to another tribunal and defeat them, because we have defeated them in one tribunal in the last couple of years, and I'm sure we'll defeat them again. So solidarity to workers all over the country who are in strike. And just one wee final point. Sorry, Richie said he would put the timer on me, and as usual, I go on too long. But one thing that is quite telling, when you consider the number of disputes that are going on across the country, and I go to a number of meetings that Richie's at, and he recites the number of them all over the country, sit and ask yourself, have I heard about any of these anywhere in the BBC? Have I heard about any of these anywhere in STV? Have I heard about any of these even in supposedly liberal papers like The Guardian? Little reporting of the action that is going on up and down the country, because we know that there's a dominant ideology in this country, which is to suppress the willingness of workers who are willing to stand up and say, we are not having this. So thanks for letting me come along, Richie, and the Scottish Workers Solidarity Network. Hopefully you'll be promoting that. We have set up an account, and we would hope to try and get branches up and down the country to contribute that, to help people such as John there and the gas workers who may be losing their jobs. So thanks very much, and I'll probably no stay for the rest of the meeting because I'm feeling pretty crap. Okay, I'm not being rude. I did want Richie at the beginning. Okay, solidarity, sisters and brothers.
Thanks very much, John. And thanks for persevering despite you not being well. John did mention two things there that perhaps I'll say follow on before introducing the next speakers, which is that, first of all, the media blackout, actually, it's been admitted by accident by bosses at British Gas that that's exactly what they rely on. Early on, there was a video of one of their directors saying that what they were hoping for was the media to pay no attention to the strike, and that they should therefore not respond to any trade union comment in the media, so that it would be buried in the darkness of a blanket of silence. That was the attitude of the British Gas bosses, and they've been quite successful in that regard when it comes to a compliant media that has done nothing to highlight substantially the issues at stake amongst the gas workers. And the same applies to the FE College lectures out today and so on, and any set of workers, which is why, although we can't compete with the scale of the mass media, the Scottish Socialist Voice is so critical to at least partially break that silence by getting workers' voices heard directly. And the other point he made was about the Scottish Workers' Solidarity Network. Now, to give an extremely brief explanation of that, because it's relevant to all these disputes, when I was victimised and sacked, there was the Reinstate Richie Venton campaign. And the people involved in that from multiple unions had discussions, including with me, about trying to continue the features of that, which was unity across sectors, unity across unions, fighters prepared to combine in order to try and win for anybody in strife. And we established what eventually we decided to call the Scottish Workers' Solidarity Network. Hopefully the name tells you what's inside the tin. And the purpose of it is not designed to replace the Scottish TUC, even though one or two people suggested that might be necessary. That's not its purpose. It's in order to act as what I've called a forum for fighters. And those fighters will include ordinary union members, shop stewards, conveners, and yes, paid officials, those principals of paid officials prepared to stand with the membership and fight back. And the one thing we're probably all agreed on, apart from solidarity with fellow workers, is that we do not believe in the nonsense, the dangerous myth of social partnership between unions and the employers, between generous secretaries and company directors, so to speak. That's a recipe for disaster, which many of us could give chapter and verse examples of. So the Scottish Workers' Solidarity Network is designed to give a platform to people in struggle. We've had meetings already with that, with the FE lecturers, with gas workers, with others speaking, and health workers, which is the next set of speakers. And we aim to try and help coordinate protests, messages of solidarity, and all the basics, which any decent body of trade unions would strive to do. So in the short term, while we're still a bit restricted because of the COVID regulations, as a bare minimum, we'll help and have been trying to help to coordinate messages of protest and solidarity to the various disputes here, including the FE colleges, the gas board, and the, called the wrong name there, British Gas, and the likes of the health workers, which brings me on to the next set of speakers. And by the way, if you want to get involved in the Scottish Workers' Solidarity Network, there'll be a link. There's a Facebook group, so, or get in touch with me, whatever you want. So the next two speakers, they're doing a bit of a double act. It's Melanie Gale and Pauline Brady. Both Melanie and Pauline are nurses in different hospitals, or community in one case. And they're both union reps, just so happens they're in the GMB. But they're involved in helping to organise and lead the NHS Workers for Fair Pay, a campaign which has got over 9,000 members of its Facebook group, and which has been spearheading the fight for a 15% pay increase, or a better way to put it, a 15% restorative pay increase in order to bring pay back to what it used to be before all the cuts in the last 10 or 11 years. And I'm proud to have been invited last summer, when there was a period when there was physical demonstrations, to have spoken on behalf of the Scottish Socialist Party on that occasion at the rally they had in Glasgow Green. And we've been trying to build solidarity with them. And both Melanie and Pauline will now give you some kind of chapter and verse of what it's like to work basically in the jaws of death on the front line during COVID, and equally to the point, what's required in order to have a recovery, what's required for a completely new, different type of society, including regarding the health service. So Melanie's going to speak first, and then Pauline. So over to you, Melanie. And then when you finish, you just jump in, Pauline, all right? Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thank you so much, Richie, as always. I'd like to say thank you very much for allowing me to come on to speak today. I'd like to say solidarity to everybody that's in a dispute at the present moment. It's been really difficult, but it's time our voices were heard. So as Richie quite rightly said, I am a nurse. I'm also a GMB representative. But I just want to kind of give you a bit of a background from where we're coming from as nurses and NHS workers. So everybody knows a year ago today, well, a year ago on 23rd of March, we were put into lockdown. Prior to that, we knew a virus was coming. We knew people were becoming really very poorly. We knew that people were really struggling. And we knew the NHS was going to be the back and forth where we were going to have to stand in that front line to look after and assist. I was one of those staff members on the front line. I had to open a COVID positive ward. I had to make sure my staff were prepared for this, because none of us were prepared for it. None of us. It was very daunting, very, very not very nice. Patients coming through our doors, very, very poorly, unable to breathe, and not sure what we could do to help them. Really, really struggling. Lack of staff, lack of resources, And this is down to a government that hasn't given us any resources for the past 10 years. You must remember as well, where we have been short-staffed for the past 10 years. But to come into a pandemic, and for NHS workers, for the job that they've done, to stand up and be counted on that front line, for the care, the dignity and the teamwork that they've shown for this past year, it hasn't been pleasant. It's been quite awful, really frightening. And for staff now, and along this past year, have been completely and utterly burnt out, tired. We work long hours. I'm still at work tonight. I have finished, but I'm still at work. We work 12, 13, 14, 15 hours. We sometimes don't get a break. You sometimes don't have time to have a break. And I think what it really is, and it comes down to it for me throughout this whole year being on a frontline worker, is the lack of regard our government has shown us, the lack of regard our government has actually put in front of us to show how much we appreciate all NHS workers. We have stood and we have worked so hard the past year. And as I can say, for me, it started in July last year when Boris had said that we weren't getting a pay rise, we weren't worthy of a pay rise, even though we'd done so like 4 months already into this pandemic. Knew another pandemic was coming again, another wave was coming, and they know fine well we're going to stand in that front line. They know fine well we're not going to walk away from patients. And for me to stand and protest, to say that no, I wasn't happy about what we were being told with, it's just not good enough. And as I can say, the reason why I came on tonight to give our wee bit about nurses and NHS workers is just so people get an understanding, because some people don't understand sometimes the jobs that we really truly do. We don't have a chance to go for a lunch break. We sometimes don't even have time to go to the toilets because we're so busy. We're looking after patients that require our care. They require us to be on the floor because they need our attention. And that comes up most, patient safety and patient care at every single turn. But as I say, COVID, the numbers are lessening at the moment, but we're unclear if it's going to come back in another wave for us again, where most of us are already at our very much wit's end for most of us now, which we all are. And it's just now trying to process the past year. Mental health in the NHS, awareness is absolutely through the roof. Staff are off due to sickness because the first wave and the second wave has tired us out completely. We have a lot of staff now off due to having flashbacks from the first wave, where, as I said, we have patients that have came through the door and unclear, been unable to help them. They couldn't get a breath. Some of our patients couldn't breathe properly, didn't understand what was happening to them, and trying to relieve them and being there for them. Patients not being able to see their loved ones through a phone, FaceTime, Zoom calls, just for relatives to see, where before we would have had that backup from relatives to help us out as well. As I say, we are very short-staffed. We are at the minimum level we can possibly be, and this will continue if we allow our government to continue to downtrodden us, beat us down and make us feel the way we do. I'm going to hand you over now to Pauline, who is going to be talking a wee bit more about what we're doing and where our future goes. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak for the first part. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Melanie.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to echo Melanie's and everyone else's solidarity with British Gas, education, lecturers, and any other worker that's currently fighting for their rights. We all seem to be in a constant battle against our government to actually respect the work that the workers do. And that's one of the reasons why the NHS Workers' Fair Pay campaign started. You know, it was doctors and dentists and police officers, teachers who were recognised last June for the work that they'd done. They got their pay rise early, and we weren't deemed as healthcare workers below doctor level as being worthy of that same recognition. And just to give a little bit of background on that, we've had cuts, and you've probably heard this. I feel like I bark on about this, and I feel like most NHS workers bark on about this, but I think it's really, really important. We've had pay cuts for the last decade under a Tory government, and that has been also supported by the SNP government. They have done nothing to try to rectify that. They'll try and make out it's all the Tories, but it really isn't. There is more that they could have done. So we, in that 10 years, we have fallen 15% below inflation. So that means the lives that we had 12 years ago, that we could afford, that we lived our lives based on the careers that we built, the professional qualifications that we've gained, and the jobs that we had our lives based around that. Now we cannot afford to live those same lives because inflation has taken over what we're earning. And that is where this becomes quite a desperate plea for a pay correction. And that is why when people say 15% seems unreasonable, it is completely unreasonable when you've lost 15%. So we need to get that back. That's all we're doing. We're asking for that to come back to us. And on that note, about what the responses we get from this campaign, the amount of abuse we get online is phenomenal, and it's happened throughout the campaign. And, you know, I actually wrote this last week. I had a quiet spell and I was just jotting down some notes about the things that I want to talk about. And I was reflecting on the abuse that I've had online over the last 9 months. And actually, the fact that we're doing this today is really relevant because the 4% being announced late last night, today has been phenomenal amount of abuse. I have been told I'm selfish after working throughout the whole of the pandemic on the front line and sacrificing my own family, moving my son out of my house because I'm a single parent and I didn't want to risk him getting the virus. All that stuff that we did for other people, we're now told that we're selfish because we want our pay corrected, which we've actually been barking on about for 10 years. It's just that now people are starting to notice. There are a few people that we can kind of talk around and say to them, right, okay, no, this is the situation. This is what's happened to us over a decade. And they begin to realise that actually we're not being completely unreasonable. But there's always ones that just want to have a go. And normally they're the ones who think that they're defending the SNP because they think that if you support a party, it means you have to support absolutely everything they decide. So what we've also found is recently with the stuff to do with the violence against women, we have found, because we're a group of nurses, group of female nurses who are campaigning, we're very, very vocal, we try to get the campaign out as much as we can, we have experienced a huge amount of abuse based purely on the fact that we are females. And you immediately think, okay, it's just men that do that, but actually it's quite scary that there's women out there who will also have a go at a woman about being a woman. We are told that we should know our place. We're just nurses, we're lazy, we're greedy, we just carry the sick bowl, we just wipe a few bums. And that's not what nurses do. That's not what nursing assistants do. We do so much more. We've got a highly skilled job. So what we've had to do as a team of campaigners, we're a very small team, there's 7 of us, we've had to work really closely together to make sure that our mental health isn't affected by this. And I think we can all say that within this 9 months, all of us have been affected in some way with our mental health. And we go through spells where we think we can't do this anymore. And I think anyone who's run a campaign, especially ones that generate some abuse, will understand exactly how we feel when we say this. But yeah, we do need to work very hard to keep our mental health at a stable level. I think it's really important what I was saying about the gender inequality side of things. It does link directly into NHS pay, because historically nursing is a female profession and therefore has always been undervalued and underpaid. And we think that's why the Tories continue to dismiss us. So we aim to fight both of those things because they are so interlinked. The future of the NHS rides on retaining staff, particularly those staff who have trained over a number of years and have more complex roles that are harder to replace. You can't just pick someone off a street and put them in a nurse's job and expect people to survive. It's not going to happen. If the NHS is successfully going to recover from COVID, we need a workforce who don't feel worthless, a workforce that's not understaffed and that are highly trained and skilled, such as registered nurses. We want to correct the wrongs of the past decade, then look at the future to ensure that the NHS isn't dissolved through destroying the workforce, which will inevitably lead to a private sell-off, which we're all seeing happen bit by bit. We want to stop that. The country needs a free health service, and they deserve one functioning at a high standard. It's basic logic that if the governments spend less on weapons and more on the NHS, pay their staff their worth, fund the services, then we will retain more nurses, drive down waiting lists and improve overall quality of care. To achieve this, we need all agenda for change NHS staff, so that's all the ones that are in this pay agree fight, for their salaries to be corrected in line with the inflation that we've lost over the past decade. Following that, we need the agreement that we can have no further pay cuts and each year receive a minimum of an inflation pay rise so we don't end up in this position again. In the past, for us to get a pay rise, we have had to sacrifice some of our terms and conditions, such as we no longer get an overtime rate, so we just get a normal standard rate if we do extra hours. And as our pay increased, our pension contribution percentage increased. It's not just that we ended up paying more, but they actually increased the percentage amount, which meant that we were actually worse off following our pay increase. We need to ensure our staff lose no more of their terms and conditions and secure that for the future. The Scottish Government entered talks and they've now offered 4%. And that's just really not acceptable given how much that we've lost. We're incredibly grateful for the fact that they considered giving us more, but it's just not cutting it when we've had 10 years of this and we are fighting tooth and nail and we are exhausted. We need a guarantee that this is going to change. Increasing all low paid workers' incomes makes economical sense, not just NHS workers, but all low paid workers. We can barely live on what we earn now. So a higher income will automatically go back into the economy. And I can assure you that we're not going to be saving that because we need to spend it. We need to spend it on groceries, on childcare, and all of that is going to help grow the economy. Post-COVID Scotland needs to promote the rebuilding of our economy, help business owners regain their trade and allow growth. What easier way is there to do that than pay workers a respectable wage so we can put it back into the economy? This isn't just about working through COVID, nor is it just about individual staff pay. This is much bigger than that. This is about saving our NHS so that everyone in the UK has access to free healthcare and not just those that can afford it. Creating a more equal society is the ultimate goal for any socialist. And recently, we've seen attempts to remove our rights of free speech, freedom of movement, and right to protest. This isn't acceptable. We all need to stand up to those restrictions. We ourselves have proved we can protest safely. We held a beautifully socially distanced, safe protest that Richie spoke about earlier, that he attended and inspired us all, and spurred us all on last year. So we know that we can replicate that, and we intend to next week. So watch out, because we're going for our daily stroll through Glasgow, and we plan to make some noise and stand up to the inequalities of this country.
Well, thanks very much to both Pauline and Melanie. Can I double check one fact? Is it still midday on the 31st? You're planning your stroll?
Yes, it is at George Square.
Just in case anybody else happens to be in the vicinity and fancies a walk, in support of the 15% claim.
We're going to bring our own handcuffs, Richie.
Okay. Now you've got them all coming. So thanks very much. And I mean, I think really that does bring it home to people. Those of us who have never worked in that sector, it brings it home to you. The kind of conditions and the sexism that workers suffer when they dare to speak out. But we see in the fact that there's quite a number of very courageous people, women included, who have stood up for their rights and have been campaigning for the 15% claim. And as I think you all know, the Scottish Socialist Voice has persistently advocated the 15%, as has the Scottish Socialist Party. And one of the things I'll just mention is that the Scottish Workers' Solidarity Network, as well as building solidarity for individual disputes, has also promoted a petition, which is to put pressure on the politicians at a time when I think they're quite sensitive, pre-election, in other words, when they're looking for votes. And the petition's calling for a £2 an hour at least pay rise for every one of the 920,000 key workers, but that should be underpinned by a £12 minimum wage for all sectors, regardless of age or gender, and also full support for the 15% claim, or the £15 an hour claim for care workers and so on. So it's not to contradict those things, it's to back them, but as an underpinning kind of unifying demand. The demand is for at least a £2 rise for every one of nearly 1 million workers in Scotland, key workers, which includes obviously people like supermarkets and others, cleansing workers, posties and so on as well as health workers. So I'd appeal to you to sign that petition and promote it, because now, as I said, is one of those windows of opportunity we should seize when some people are preoccupied with getting a vote off you because they want to get into Parliament or get back in, whichever is the case. Make them put their money where their mouth is, demand that they publicly support those modest demands as a means of helping to combat poverty pay. So thanks very much, and I would encourage people who are available to join the stroll, we'll call it, on the 31st in George Square at midday. Now, the final of the panel of excellent speakers is Jake Molloy. Back in the 1980s, I suppose you could say that the oil rigs and the offshore industry was almost like the Wild West. That's not to say that Jake was a cowboy or something, but it's the conditions that workers faced, where oil barons were hell-bent on making maximum profit, and those who dared to stand up and say that they wanted to organise effective unions were quite liable to be sacked and blacklisted. But Jake was one of those courageous people who pioneered the organisation of workers' unions in the offshore industry back in the 80s onwards, and helped to set up what was called the Offshore Industry Liaison Committee, which then in turn he became the General Secretary of for I think it was 11 years, before it then merged with the RMT, the Rail Maritime and Transport Union, which, by the way, people should give support to on Sunday at the picket lines in the railways. But Jake has fought courageously for improvements, and he's also got more than something to say about the whole issue of a just transition. And I'll say before preempting his speech that the Scottish Socialist Party has always taken the position that we need green energy, we need a transition to that away from fossil fuel, but we do not need it on the backs of the workers in the North Sea. We need their livelihoods and conditions to be protected, but transferred their skills into green production of energy. So that's just to make that point, and I'm sure Jake will elaborate on current debates and discussions about that subject. So over to you, Jake. A big welcome to Jake Molloy, the RMT organiser of the offshore industry.
Thanks, Richie. And can I just say, firstly, that's been pretty humbling listening to the previous speakers. I feel a bit of a fraud coming on here to talk now after what we've just heard. The workers I represent have got serious problems, but I think they pale almost in significance when you listen to the care workers there. Yeah, Richie's asked me to talk to you tonight about what's going on, the consequence of COVID in the offshore energy sector, but moreover talk about the potential to turn it around for the whole economy and create what we talk about in terms of people's recovery, a green and just recovery for the whole country, really, because if ever there was a time to do it, it's now, coming out of what's going to be the biggest depression we've ever faced. And another decade or more of austerity. I should say that, first of all, when it comes to climate change, most of these dirty oil workers agree we've got a climate emergency and we need to do something about it. But what we don't need to do is shut the North Sea down and kill off 260,000 jobs along with it. You know, if we shut the North Sea down, the night would be importing gas and oil from other areas of the world for decades to come, because it's going to take decades to transition over. 80% of the country's domestic fuel and heat is provided by gas currently, and we're not going to turn that over overnight. So it's going to take a bit of time and a bit of effort. And if we don't get it right, it's probably going to be painful. Painful in terms of cost, and you know who will pay for it if we don't get it right. You and I. And as I say, just having listened to the conditions for the care workers, I don't see care workers shelling out to get the gas boilers removed and move into electricity. So a massive, massive task ahead of us. But just to reflect on the last year, the last 5 years really, because in the oil and gas sector, there was a massive downturn in 2014-15, which saw 20% of the workforce wiped out. Things didn't really pick up until the beginning of 2019, and then the curtain fell on March 23rd last year. To date, we've lost about 12,000 from offshore, and the number continues to creep up onshore. Projections are by October this year, we'll be looking at 30,000 gone from the energy sector, and specifically in oil and gas. Now, you might say that's desperate, but we've got other opportunities coming with the renewables and decommissioning and everything else. But sadly, that's not the case. We haven't built a single turbine yet. We've not put a single jacket in a fabrication yard. We haven't built a single blade, nor a turbine. Everything's been built in the United Arab Emirates or China, and bits of Europe are picking up on most of the blade work, Denmark and Germany. The Saudi Arabia of renewables, as Alex Salmond called it, although he's probably regretting that term now as well. It just hasn't happened. It just hasn't transpired at all. And it's not gonna unless we get a change in the political approach to energy. And it's not just offshore, it's energy and transport really, which I think we could see at the front and centre of a green recovery. Because, you know, the new trains, which everybody talks about, or were talking about before COVID, on Scottish Railways are 40-year-old Mankey diesel burning trains, which have been brought up for other train operating companies down south. We're shutting down the bus makers in Scotland, Alexander Dennis buses. We're shutting down Rolls-Royce in Scotland. We're shutting down CS Wind, the only turbine manufacturer that existed in Argyll, shut down. Gemini Rail, building trains, shut down. And it just continues apace, and we're allowing it to happen. And, you know, when you reflect back on the oil and gas sector, they talk about the wasted windfall and what could have been had Thatcher no sold off the pass and sold off the British National Oil Corporation. We could have been like Norway, you know, with their National Oil Corporation in Statoil, or as it's now called, Equinor. But we sold the pass, and we're selling the pass again. We're letting it happen again. The irony is that BP, Total, Shell, they're all now buying licenses for wind, and they're going to continue to reap 10% shareholder benefits whilst our electricity prices are going up. And I think we've got to put that into the context of climate change for the country and for the nation, because if we don't get it right this time, we're going to be paying through the nose when we have the potential to be the main producer of energy, not just for Scotland, but for the UK and beyond. We can be selling electricity. We don't have the storage capacity for what we're producing right now. We're producing that much. They're shutting the turbines down just off the beach here at Aberdeen. And every time they shut it down, we've got to pay the energy company because their blades are on the turn. It's the economics of the madhouse. It really is. And I think we've got to put that in the context of the debate about climate change, because, as I say, some, not them all, but some of the climate change campaigners want the plug pulled on the North Sea and a swift move over to renewables. It's not going to be swift. And if we got it right, I mean, we could do so much more. Just to reflect for a couple of minutes on what could be going on right now, but it isn't going on because of lack of political will. We could start decommissioning right now of hundreds of wells that have been shut down for decades. There's wells out there that have been shut down for 30 years and they haven't been decommissioned yet. They've got to be decommissioned, but they're not doing it. And the government's sitting on a pot, UK government's sitting on a pot of money, which has been put aside for that work, but they're not releasing it. We could have the ports, which have been neglected for years, developed to do structural decommissioning, bring all that thousands of tons of steel that's going to be decommissioned in and recycle it. We could have fabrication works. We could have actually BiFab working. We could have recycle centres. We could use the recycled steel to manufacture caissons. And in a climate change context, we're building all these turbines, jackets, fixings, piles, etc., in China. And they're burning the dirtiest, blackest coal on earth to do that. And once they've made them, and they've made them probably not to the same standards we could if we were using the recycled steel that's there, they're putting them on a ship and sailing them half around the world. And they're telling us it's in the interest of climate change to do that. Madness. We could reform the remaining gas, the gas that we've got. Why not produce it? Why not turn it into hydrogen, which can be done? And if you capture the carbon off of that, you've got blue hydrogen. Why not start transforming now the whole domestic gas setup? You know, we've got the gas guys on strike here because they're getting their contracts hammered, that they're going to be the most critical workers in that whole process for climate change. They're going to need to transfer every boiler up into the country over to burn hydrogen. Either that or they're going to have to strip out the entire infrastructure and make it safe. And yet they're crippling them with contract changes. We could start a scrappage scheme right now for the manky diesel buses that are running across the country and the trains. And we could manufacture new ones and start building green, hydrogen-powered or electric buses and trains. We could commission carbon capture right now, and we could take all the carbon and stick it back in to the reservoirs which have been depleted of gas offshore. Safe storage of carbon. We could build hydrogen and biofueled turbines, and you know, refineries could be transferred over for biofuel production and hydrogen production. The opportunities out there are endless, but we're doing nothing. Well, I say we're doing nothing. The UK government is doing something. It just invested 16 billion. You've probably seen it the other day. A sector deal was announced for the UK sector, the deal that's going to bring about this transition, this green transition that Boris talks about all the time. 16 billion is getting handed out to various sectors to do this work. But we no return. No return. It's getting handed to private enterprises, capitalist organisations, and it's incredible when you think about it, because we keep getting told by the Scottish Government that they can't invest in us. They can't invest in turbine manufacturers and manufacturing generally because of state aid limits. And this is at a time when we've got the French, Italian, German, Dutch, and Spanish state-owned train operating companies running our railways, and we've got the Abu Dhabi, Chinese, Korean, Norwegian, and others state-owned oil companies producing more oil and gas. And in the case of the Norwegian one, Equinor, they're building the biggest wind farm on the planet, Dogger Bank, just off the coast of Humber. And they're the richest country on earth right now. It'd be the best pension scheme on the planet for the people of the Norwegian state. And good on them, they've got it right. But we're paying for it. We're paying their pensions by allowing Equinor to take up the licence and paying them to do it and invest in them. It just beggars belief, really beggars belief. And, you know, as I've said before, I think the oil and gas sector has been a wasted windfall. We cannot let that happen again. We cannot allow the whole transition process to be taken from us and thousands dumped, because that 9,000 that have gone, 12,000 that have gone, they're not moving into the renewable sector. There's no jobs for them. There's not a single one of them has moved into the renewable sector. Most of them are heading down south to work on a nuclear plant or work on the trains, the infrastructure. They're not moving into renewables at all. And you know, when you think about the economic crisis, which is we're already in, and it's only going to get worse, you could not make this up in terms of a plan for the economy, a green recovery, a people's recovery. I mean, I could go on and on. I won't, but I keep hearing about all the rhetoric about the creation of a new model and for the new normal world that we're moving into, and how we need to move from crisis and change. But that cannot be done without taking ownership of these key industries, or at the very least taking a significant share and investment in them, so that we can ensure a green and just people's recovery which provides returns to the economy, society and the workforce, which currently is being dumped. But moreover, it allows the care workers, the nurses that we've just heard, it allows the potential for them to get out of fuel poverty. It allows the potential for the whole of Scotland to get out of fuel poverty and to be able to feed their bairns and move away from food banks and everything else, if we can get it right. And we've got to get it right. Either that, or it's just going to be the oil and gas sector played out again. It's going to be another wasted windfall. And we sit long after I've gone, telling your grandbairns about the mistakes we made again. Don't let it happen. I'll leave it there.
Well, thanks a million, Jake. I mean, Jake's contribution, which is only a short one, I think encapsulates, frankly, the socialist case for the way society needs to be changed, including regarding energy. And I think the fact that we asked him to speak, rather than a no disrespect to scientists as such, but the fact that we've got Jake speaking with his workers' knowledge of the situation plus his scientific knowledge of the industry is precious by comparison with just people who have studied the subject, and like I said, no harm to them, and we need their expertise, but don't have that immediate direct working knowledge of the situation as well. The two combined could be invincible. And in order to draw this to a conclusion, I'll just perhaps say a couple of things about what I would appeal to people to do. I hope that every single one of you is like me in feeling quite moved and motivated by the individual contributions that everybody who's spoken tonight, whether it's John from the gas, John from the colleges, whether it's Melanie and Pauline from the hospitals and the community nursing, whether it's Jake from the offshore sector. I think everybody has made it real what life is like for the working class majority of the population and what this system is doing to people and doing to the planet into the bargain. And I hope that therefore one of the many conclusions you'll draw is that you need to do your bit, whatever that amounts to, either as an individual and, where possible, as a trade unionist through your union organisations, your branch, your committees, your national committees and so on, that you do your best to build solidarity for each of the individual disputes that is currently taking place, and also use the Scottish Workers' Solidarity Network as a means of helping us to coordinate that effort. That's one thing I would say. Take part in the events. There's a picket at Unionston tomorrow of the gas workers. Hold the line, I think, is one of the phrases being used. There's the strikes by railway workers, the conductors, on Sunday and the following Sunday and so on over a pay dispute. And there's stroll in George Square on the 31st as a contribution to the fight for 15% for the health workers. So it'll be available. I would suggest and appeal to you to take part in that. Sign the petitions, including the one the Solidarity Network has initiated for the £2 increase, the £12 minimum wage and so on. Put the politicians on the spot when they're feeling a bit in need of friends because they're looking for votes. Do all those things. Subscribe to The Voice as a means of helping to build up an alternative media, a workers' voice, because that's what it aspires to be, in order to break through the blankets of silence that are thrown by the mainstream media on behalf of the employing class and the ruling class in general. I would appeal to you to do all of those things and go away even more motivated after having listened to people. But I suppose the generalised conclusion I would suggest that we should all draw is that there's things that we've learned tonight that reinforce what I tried to convey in my introduction, that contrary to what Maggie Thatcher said in the past, that there's no such thing as society, we've seen during this COVID period, we've seen the best of people and all that's worst about the system. We've seen all the solidarity between people in their job, in their work, and to the vulnerable, the way that they've cared for them and so on. I don't mean just as a job, but also on a voluntary basis in communities. We've seen all of that. We've seen the best of people, the best things about people, and we've seen the worst things about this society. We've seen the fact that the private capitalist market system and the privatisation that goes with that, and the PFI schemes and all the rest of it, including the fact that there's figures, won't bury you with them, there's figures that I've used that shows concretely that money was used to build hospitals on the PFI, where you paid for the equivalent of 6 hospitals and got 1. That's the kind of society that is bankrupt and incapable of dealing with any kind of crisis. And it took the power of the state, of public sector intervention, if you want to call it that, to actually tackle the crisis caused by the coronavirus, if belatedly. And that past year, I think, as I said, has shown what's best about human solidarity and what's worst about capitalist greed and inequality. And build on the best in order to challenge capitalism, to use the collective power of working people to bring about a totally different society. Because, like Jake, I'm utterly sick to the back teeth of all this gibberish about a new normal coming from those in power, governments and the rich in general, because it's not a new normal. The only thing that's new about it is that they intend to savage us even further and deeper and harder, as we've seen clues of in British Gas, British Telecom, etc., in the attacks they're conducting at the minute. And I think what we all need to try and do is connect the general goal of socialism with fight and concrete demands we can unify around and mobilise around that people can relate to. That's what we've always tried, for example, in the Scottish Socialist Party. So we're fighting for a £12 minimum wage rather than allow poverty to kill people. We're fighting for a minimum working week of 16 hours for any worker that wants it, rather than the horrendous insecurity of zero contracts. We're fighting for workers' control of health and safety at work. We're fighting for massive public investment in the likes of the health service and the creation of a national care service, which will be debated next week, by the way, on the 30th, an SSP online debate with the SNP on the subject of creating a national care service that's free, publicly owned and fit for purpose with decent conditions for the workforce. And we desperately need to crusade for what Jake has described, clean, green energy. But as he's put his finger on himself, ownership is the key. Ownership is the key. And to bring about a change of ownership into the hands of the public requires the conscious, organised, collective power of workers to be wielded. It's not going to be gifted to us. There's too many vested interests in the form of big multinationals, no matter what nationality they might be. And to challenge that, we need the potential power actually organised and built of workers and their families to win that totally different new normal, where public ownership of key sectors like energy, transport, construction, and the banks and so on is a part of the new future we're trying to build. And to arrive at that situation, we need consciously organised socialists in the unions, in the workplaces, in the communities, schools and colleges to convince hundreds of thousands of others of that future, a decent, humane, socialist future, where we're not polluting the planet and trashing it, we're not trashing people, we're organising society for the benefit of people and not people being organised for the benefit of the rich and the exploiters. So do whatever you can. Build solidarity with others in struggle. Subscribe to The Voice. Attend some of the events that I've mentioned. And I'd also urge you, since I'm the speaker from the Scottish Socialist Party tonight, the Voice Forum is broader than that. It's open to anybody of interest on the subject. But within that, the Scottish Socialist Party also is a force, I think, that needs the attention of anybody who sees themselves as a socialist. To put it this way, if you're a socialist, join a socialist party. Don't pretend that by being a socialist in the SNP or Labour, you're going to change things. Such people as that I have always described in recent times as political prisoners who should be released from prison and actually join a socialist party, full-blooded, unashamed, the Scottish Socialist Party. So thanks to everybody for taking part in this. Thanks for everybody that attended tonight. I know some of you had missed watching Northern Ireland play in the European Champions qualifications. I've heard some other teams are playing as well. But nevertheless, the fact you've turned out and dedicated some of your time to this is to be welcomed and appreciated. I know there's others who keep messaging me who for some reason couldn't make the connection. But regardless of that, it's been really well attended. There was more than 200 people registered to attend, about 250 actually. And that in itself shows the interests in these ideas. So thanks to everybody. I'll see you at some of the events and keep fighting. We've got a world to win. We've got the power of the working class potentially. It might seem uphill, but with determination and organisation and like-minded people banding together, we can change things for the better. Thanks very much and good night.